And that has been started. Please take space, make space, allow people to talk as listen, be respectful of others, assume good intent. Please put your questions in the chat for Q&A at the end. So we've got quite a few presentations, 7 of them. So we're going to do all of those first, and then we're going to do Q&A at the end. So put your questions in the chat, and then we will address them at the end. Here's our agenda. So we're already 6 minutes in. We'll cover more as we get to the overview and the agenda. So then Gwen will cover the Grand Boulevard overview. Then we'll do Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Palo Alto, Redwood City, Burlingame, Macoma, and then Q&A. To make it flow along, each speaker is going to introduce the speaker after them. And I'm the text slide mover, so just please say next when you're ready to move on to the next slide. And with that, we'll hand it off to Gwen. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. While we're here, I want each of the speakers to introduce themselves. So go ahead, Gwen. And then Carol.
Everyone. Yeah, I'm Gwen Buckley. I'm a senior planner at Samtrans, and I help support the Grand Boulevard Initiative. So are we going through everyone right now?
Yes. All the introductions.
Hi, I'm Leslie Xavier. I'm with the City of Santa Clara, and I'll be going over our El Camino Real specific plan.
Thank you, Leslie. Carol is going to speak as well, or if not, Lillian?
Hi, morning. My name is Lillian Sang with City of Sunnyvale. I'm the Principal Transportation Engineer here.
Hi, I'm Ria Hooch-Barrett-Lowe. I'm the Transportation Manager for the City of Mountain View.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Starlack. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Palo Alto.
And I'm Jessica Manzi. I'm the Transportation Manager for the City of Redwood City.
Hi, I'm Howard Wetton. I'm the chair of the Traffic Safety and Parking Commission for the City of Burlingame.
Good morning. I'm Michael Laughlin with the Town of Como Planning Department.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
I should just add, we're hoping to also have a member of our city council join us for our part of the presentation. So I'll introduce her in absentia, Emily Beach. And hopefully she'll join us. If not, I'll fill in.
Thank you, Howard. All right, Gwen, take it away.
Yep, so I just wanted to give a very brief history of El Camino Real. So as many of you know, originally the purpose of El Camino was to connect 21 different missions throughout the state of California, all the way from San Diego up to Sonoma. And then in the early 20th century, the section of El Camino Real from San Jose to the San Francisco county line was one of the first paved streets in California. And so that really created this this boom of building along El Camino Real, and you'll see a lot of auto-oriented motels and large parking lots, and also a lot of the major downtowns for cities along El Camino are just right off of El Camino. And these photos, I tried to line up exactly at the same spot, but the first one is from 1914 in San Bruno on El Camino Real, I think right at the San Mateo Avenue intersection. And the one on the right is today. So you can see there is new development along El Camino, but you still have a lot of that historic auto-oriented land use and also streetscape. Next slide. And so as cities were looking at El Camino and how to improve it and make it kind of more people-oriented, they decided to get together and form the Grand Boulevard Initiative in 2006. And GBI is a combination of 19 cities, the 19 cities along El Camino Real, both counties, Samtrans, VTA, and then regional agencies, including Caltrans, which owns El Camino Real because it's technically a state highway. And the primary vision of GBI is just to kind of work together to create these connections along across the different communities and transform it into more of a people-oriented destination. Next slide. And then, so just talking quickly about some opportunities for improvement and from the transportation perspective. So pre-COVID, traffic was getting worse and worse, and really just it wasn't sustainable to keep focusing on the automobile. And we there's lots of opportunities for alternative modes of transportation. El Camino Real is a direct north-south connection going through many downtowns and connecting many different destinations. And so it's a good, there's opportunity for bike facilities along El Camino. And it also touches a lot of different major transit stations, including 5 of the 6 BART stations that are in San Mateo County. It's within a quarter mile of those, and as well as a quarter mile of 10 Caltrain stations. And there's even more Caltrain stations within a half mile. And it's also a major corridor for bus transportation. Next slide. And so just wanted to iterate that GBI provides this type of overarching coordination, sharing best practices, has all these common goals and guiding principles, but it is up to each individual city to implement the GBI vision in ways that best serve their community. And you'll see a lot of that today in these presentations of how there's like this overarching need to improve El Camino Real, but each city is approaching it ways that best serve their community, and each city has different unique needs. And spoiler alert, Burlingame has these huge trees and other cities don't, and so that's another factor they have to consider. But yeah, here's the website if you want to check out more information about GBI. And then next slide. And here is the segments of El Camino Real that we'll be talking about today, going south up to north on our virtual bike ride. And so with that, I will hand it over to Santa Clara to start us off.
Thank you, Gwen. So once again, I'm Leslie Xavier with the City of Santa Clara. I work in the planning department, and I am the project manager for the El Camino Real specific plan. And also with me today is Carol Shariat from our Public Works Department. So we're going to split the presentation. If you want to go to the next slide. So a little bit about our project. El Camino Real in the City of Santa Clara is a 3.2 mile long corridor from the western city limits to Lafayette Street, which is in the east. And our specific plan covers both sides of the corridor and actually includes our city hall as well. Next slide. So today I'm just focusing on the transportation related portions of our specific plan process. Some of the desired outcomes when we went through our extensive community outreach process was to make the environment more walkable, better mobility and connections. At the eastern end of our corridor is the Santa Clara Transit Station, which will have future BART and currently has Caltrain and bus service, and then adding more transportation options. Next slide. So here's our mobility framework for the specific plan itself. The goal of the specific plan is to make El Camino Real a multimodal corridor. It currently caters to cars, as everyone knows, 3 lanes in each direction with parking on both sides. Buses stop, pull in and pull out at the curb to load and unload. So the goal of the specific plan is to make that a multimodal corridor and then providing those connections north and south to the corridor as well. So we have north-south connections that are a transit priority access corridor, which is the orange lines that go north to south. We have a bicycle priority access corridor, which are green lines that go north to south. And then vehicle priority are the blue lines that go north to south and our expressways that traverse the corridor. So providing connections to the corridor for all those different types of modes. Go ahead and hit the next slide. I believe Carol was going to start with these slides.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, once again, I'm Carol Shariat, the Principal Transportation Planner in the City of Santa Clara. So here we just kind of want to show existing conditions what we have today on El Camino. So we have 3 travel lanes and a very wide right turn lane due to our, our paving project that that occurred on El Camino. So we had asked Caltrans if we can widen that right turn lane in anticipation of a bike lane. And you'll see that we have, for us, very narrow sidewalks and on-street parking and no bike facilities. Next slide. And so we have an interim concept that we've developed for the project. And as you'll see, we want to put in some type of physical barrier. It could be a median, it could be some type of bollards. And then we do have our bikeway, but we don't know yet. It may be a buffered bikeway. It may possibly be a class 4, but this is just the interim until we have redevelopment projects come through. And so we don't have any funding for this yet, but this is just our initial vision of what it could look like. And as you see, we have wider sidewalks and street trees. And then the most important thing is that we would remove on-street parking. Next slide. And then our final concepts, as everything has been redeveloped, are 20-foot sidewalks, street trees, furnishing, and then we definitely would have our cycle track, and also we would have our. We decided we would want bus boarding islands. And next slide. And then this is just a bird's eye view of what it would look like. And on the left-hand side, if you can see, is where we would have our bus boarding islands as if we had a bus stop there. And then on the right side is where we do not have a bus boarding island. And if you can see, then we also have our protected bike lanes as well. Next slide. And then these are just some examples showing you what it could look like. We haven't really determined what our cycle track will look like, but at least we wanted to provide examples for everyone in the public. And then on that left side there is, example of our bus boarding island. Next slide. And then I'll hand this back over to Leslie.
Sure. So we're currently making some revisions to the specific plan. We should be done with that in the next few weeks for our Planning Commission hearing in the end of April, and then an adoption hearing in front of the City Council at the end of May, early June. And then our website is up there. The draft plan is posted on the website. In the next coming weeks, our final revised draft plan will be posted there as well. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lillian. Next slide, please. I'm going to start my presentation on the segment of El Camino Real within the city of Sunnyvale. So the portion of El Camino Real within Sunnyvale is approximately 3.7 miles long, starting at the western city limits at Bernardo Avenue and ending at the eastern city limit at Helen Avenue. It is a 6-lane arterial with 3 travel lanes on each side with a posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour. And along the corridor, most of the land use are retail, commercial, with some residential developments. And generally, the configurations under the existing conditions is that for some segments, we do have on-street parking, and there are some segments that we do not have on-street parking. Next slide, please. On El Camino Real, under the existing conditions, the only location where we have bicycle facilities is between Sunnyvale Avenue and Fair Oaks Avenue, where we have a class 2 bike lane on both sides of the street. Next slide, please. In August of last year, we have adopted the Sunnyvale Active Transportation Plan, where we have identified proposed bicycle, pedestrian, and safe route to schools improvements on Sunnyvale streets. Next slide, please. The proposed bicycle improvements identified on El Camino Real is a class 4 separated bikeway where on-street parking, on locations where on-street parking can be removed. So what we're planning on doing is putting some kind of physical barriers between the vehicular travel lane and the bicycle lane. Next slide, please. Along the auto road section of El Camino Real, on-street parking will remain. And what we're looking at is to install a class 1 multi-use path behind the curb. Implementation for both the class 1 and the class 4 facilities on El Camino Real, more longer term improvements which we have identified in the ATP. And we envision that we would be implementing them as properties are redeveloped in the future. Next slide, please. The other improvements we have identified is located at the triangle that is bounded by El Camino Real, Wolf Road, and Fremont Avenue. Back in 2016, we have conducted a Wolf Road corridor traffic improvement study. And in June of 2016, the City Council has approved some of the safety improvements in this area. So some of the highlighted improvements that we have identified is to install a new signal at the intersection of Fremont Avenue and El Camino Real, and reconfigure the lane configuration at the intersection of Wolf and El Camino, such that we can redirect some of the traffic away from that intersection and make the circulation for this triangle a little more smoother. And as part of that, we also identified some other bike improvements, such as extending some of the existing bike facilities on Wolf, as well as installing green bike lanes and bike boxes at certain locations. It is a longer term improvements that we have identified in our transportation impact fee program. So we will be working toward the implementation of it as we continue to collect TIF money from developments. Next slide, please. We are also working on the El Camino Real corridor specific plan update. We anticipate the draft will be released for public review end of this summer, and the final plan adoption by the end of this year. If you want to find out more about the updates, you can visit the project website, or you can contact Jeffrey Cusinota, our senior planner in the community development department. Next slide, please. And if you want to find out more about the what we have identified in the active transportation plan, you can go to our city website and search for the plan, or you can also email me for any questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're moving to Mountain View. I'm Rhea Hooch-Barrett-Lowe. I'm the Transportation Manager for the City of Mountain View. And the Grand Boulevard Initiative envisions El Camino as a place to live, work, shop, and play through a combination of multimodal links and community-focused nodes that go all the way from Daly City to San Jose. So with that in mind, the City of Mountain View has attempted to both think and act both regionally and locally as we plan for El Camino Real in our city. And this planning includes the Cross-City Peninsula Bikeway Initiative, which we've been carrying out. It's been carried out via the Managers Mobility Partnership, which is a partnership of 4 cities, Mountain View, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Redwood City. And the initiative has been convened by Joint Venture Silicon Valley. And so within that partnership, we're looking at 3 corridors, which you can see in this map. The first one is Middlefield Road, which is up the north end of the map. The kind of the Caltrain right of way, not necessarily Caltrain, could be Central Expressway, Evelyn, Alma, some sort of combination of that corridor, and which is in the middle, the blue one, and then the orange one from this map is El Camino Real. Next slide, please. So at the local level, we've also been planning through a number of plans. One of them is the general plan, which identified El Camino Real as a change area within the city of Mountain View. Additionally, we have the El Camino Real Precise Plan, which called for either buffered or protected bicycle facilities along El Camino Real. And then thirdly, we have the El Camino Real Streetscape Plan, which furthers the concept design for these bike facilities along the 4 miles of El Camino Real in Mountain View. The Streetscape Plan was developed with input from the community, as well as a technical advisory committee, which included Caltrans. Caltrans owns El Camino Real, the roadway, VTA, which runs its, oh, no, you can stay on that previous one. VTA, which runs the buses along El Camino, Los Altos, Palo Alto, and Sunnyvale. And the plan was approved in 2019. Now you can go to the next slide. So under this plan, we envision El Camino Real as shifting from its current configuration as an urban highway with wide travel lanes that allow for fast speed if there's not too much congestion. It has parking and has no bicycle facilities. And then if you go to the next slide, it would move to a more pedestrian and bicycle friendly facility. So in the top is, you can see it has a class 4 protected bikeways and narrower travel lanes for the motor vehicles. In the bottom, for the pinch points along the roadway, for example, where we have a double left turn lane, it would drop down to class 2 bike facilities at a minimum. Also moving to the next slide, at intersections, we plan to have protected intersections at the cross corridor connections. So locations such as Calderon, Castro Street, those cross corridor locations would have the protected intersections, and then also new crosswalks at locations where there's a long distance between crossings. And so there are 3 of these locations. One of them is Pettis Avenue, which is shown here. Also Bonita and Crestview is the other one. And then there would also be intersection improvements for pedestrians at all of the intersections. So improving the visibility for pedestrians, and which, you know, also improves facilities for bikes as well, if pedestrians are more visible as well. So as I move to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Caltrans is the owner of the roadway. And while we were undertaking the El Camino Real Streetscape Plan, we learned that Caltrans has plans to repave El Camino north of Grant Road, the 237 to the county line. And so we started thinking about what we could do to go from the planning of the Streetscape Plan to implementation as quickly as possible. Next slide. Oh, actually, it's just a click forward. For many bikeway projects like this, one of the major concerns that the community has is the potential for impacts to business as a result of removing parking in order to facilitate new bicycle facilities. And so we undertook an innovative parking study for El Camino Real, where we looked at both the on-street occupancy, which is indicated in kind of, I guess, the combination of the yellow, orange, and red in this slide, and then also the off-street availability of parking for those segments where people were parking on street. And this work was carried out by, it wasn't actually part of the funding that we had for the Streetscape Plan. And so it was carried out very kindly by staff from the Capital Projects Group, from Traffic Group, from Transportation. And it was a very collaborative effort that, you know, happened all day, all night, on weekdays and weekends. And so we got this, we were able to obtain this information on where people are parking or not parking, and in places where they're parking, if they have other options and they're just using the on-street parking out of convenience. And so what this allowed us to do was to make a proposal to council as to which segments we want to highlight, where there's going to be the fewest parking impacts. So you can see from Castro Street South, there's few parking impacts, and therefore this was proposed as the first segment for protected bikeways, and then the pedestrian, the other things that are going into the Caltrans repaving project are the new crossings, which was actually initiated through Caltrans itself, the funding for that piece, and then also crosswalk improvements for all of the intersections that are included in the Caltrans project. And so based on the parking study and the work that we did to kind of initiate contact with Caltrans and to get this integrated into their project, we also pushed as staff to get this into our capital improvement program, our 5-year capital improvement program, as soon as possible. And so it's now in the capital improvement program, and we're working with Caltrans, and we argued that this was a high priority. To get into the first 3 years, it means that other things are getting displaced or moved around, or things are shifting, and so that's a big ask to do. But we argued that it saves the city a lot of money to do this as part of a Caltrans repaving project, as opposed to going out there and having our own project where we're digging up the road again, and it's not going to be as clean as if it's integrated into the Caltrans project. And we've also been really pleasantly surprised at how cooperative Caltrans has been to embrace this kind of initiative as well. And we expect it to be built by about 2023. So we're looking forward to El Camino becoming a better place to work, to live, to bike, and to be in Mountain View. And we're excited to see this work continue across the region. And you can move to the next slide. Thank you to Silicon Valley Bike Coalition for helping us to think and act regionally and locally. And you can go to the next slide. We'll move to Sylvia from Palo Alto.
There we go. Thanks, Ria. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sylvia Starlack. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Palo Alto. Next slide. My presentation, other way. My presentation will orient you to the Palo Alto setting and some of the history of bike planning in town. I'll talk about our recent interactions with Caltrans on their repaving project that Ria just mentioned. And then I'll describe our plans for improvements to El Camino Real intersections and a future opportunity for community engagement on El Camino Real. Next slide, please. To set the scene, I'm sure most of you know, Palo Alto is located between Menlo Park and Mountain View at the bottom of the peninsula. In Palo Alto, El Camino Real runs north and south. That's what we say. We have some of the highest bike commute ridership in California, I believe, around 8 to 10%. Biking's in the DNA of our city. We've been hosting bike safety education for children in town since the 50s. And we're a town that values the ability of children to walk and bike to school, and that's impacted our bike planning in town. Another reason why biking is popular here is that adjacent transportation demand management programs of Stanford University and Stanford Research Park are very strong and draw a lot of bicyclists. They are located on the west side of town across El Camino Real for most of our housing. In addition, Palo Alto is within biking distance of Facebook and Google, which I also labeled on this, which are to the east, and getting across 101 is important for people who want to bicycle to those locations. So our housing's located in the middle of town with employment located to the east and west on the other side of barrier infrastructure. Layered on top of this are the 4,000 children who bike to school every day in Palo Alto in non-pandemic years. So that's 1/3 of our students who bike to school. And that count does not include students who walk to school. We're talking about bikes. So our robust Safe Routes to School program, or partnership with our school district and PTA, have allowed us to invest in biking and walking in town. Next slide, please. So I want to show you what the resulting bike network is here. So focusing on this network, this map is a combination of bike lanes, bike routes, and quiet streets that are great for biking in town. Note that we've invested in north and south bike routes that are parallel to El Camino Real. The Bryant Street Bike Boulevard and the Park Boulevard Bike Boulevard are here. And I also want to mention that we've also focused on improving infrastructure to get across the freeway, highway, and Caltrain barriers in town. The small red and blue dots on the right side of the map there show the new Adobe Creek pedestrian and bicycle overcrossing location. That's going to open this summer. We're very excited about that. And then the open red circles show our upcoming efforts to improve El Camino Real crossings, and I'll talk to you about those in a bit. We do have two multi-use paths just off of El Camino Real that are parallel, that are right there, but they don't connect to each other and they're hard to get to. On the left side of the map along El Camino Real, you'll see a light green trail. Sorry, it's faint, but it is there on the unit. There it is. Thank you for the, it's closer to the green Stanford Arboretum indicator there. But you'll see that that line represents the Stanford Perimeter Trail that the university built or is building to ring the campus. But that trail is open to the public. The city has, there it is, there. The city also has a small segment of multi-use trail on the other side of El Camino through El Camino Park at the top left corner of that map. But this trail doesn't reach south of University Avenue, and it's kind of hard to get to. Next slide. There have been some recent attempts to address El Camino Real in Palo Alto. In 2017, the city was awarded a grant to improve pedestrian safety on El Camino, but the project scope did not include bike facilities, and we're unable to change the scope of that grant. So the city will not initiate this project due to the limited scope. In 2018, our planning commission reviewed Grand Boulevard concepts for El Camino, but did not recommend that these move forward to council. Unfortunately, in 2020, just before shelter in place, a youth was killed trying to cross El Camino Real at California Avenue, which is the intersection pictured here. And this tragedy has invigorated the El Camino Real conversation regarding the safety of people crossing and using the road. Next slide. It turns out that Caltrans has a project to repave El Camino that Ria just mentioned to you. The purpose of this this project is to improve safety, access, and mobility for pedestrians at signalized intersections. The scope of the project is to repave the road, provide wheelchair ramps, sidewalk repairs, accessible pedestrian signals, and pedestrian countdown timers. Construction is scheduled to begin around late May of 2020. So Caltrans told cities they could add out-of-scope items, like Mountain View is adding out-of-scope items to their project if they had 3 things by the end of 2020. And those requirements were, first, a council-approved project, second, a project that had already gone through environmental review, and third, funding to pay for those improvements that cities wanted to add to that scope. Because of the Palo Alto focus on crossing El Camino Real, our bike plan did not specify projects along El Camino Real. And Palo Alto has not had a robust conversation about what should happen on the corridor. So we did not put forward a project for inclusion into the Caltrans repaving project. However, we did ask Caltrans for a few things. Next slide. We spoke to Caltrans about complete street design elements within their project scope. And I know that Sergio's on this call and I have to talk to him about our request, but we did speak to the repaving project manager. And we asked for high visibility crosswalks and advanced stop bars and intersection through markings for bicyclists where appropriate. And those photos here are of the things that we've asked for. We've also asked for any other safety measures that they could install on the corridor, particularly at school route crossings. As I mentioned, we have thousands of kids biking in town and hundreds cross El Camino in normal years every day. In addition, we added requests for signal timing changes, including leading pedestrian intervals, longer pedestrian crossing times, and a safety evaluation at the California Avenue intersection. Caltrans had started implementing leading pedestrian intervals in Palo Alto at 4 locations earlier this year, To improve safety, we've asked Caltrans for LPI throughout the entire corridor in Palo Alto. As mentioned earlier, next slide. As mentioned earlier, we've been prioritizing crossing El Camino, and we have 2 upcoming projects addressing this. This one is along the Charleston and Raspadero Road corridor. This intersection is part of a multimodal project that is along a 2.3-mile corridor that upgraded bicycle and pedestrian facilities, improved signal synchronization, and included a lane reduction. The final phase of the project will extend bike lanes through the El Camino Real intersection, completing work that's key to improving safety on this important school and commute route. The project will remove a pork chop island, redesign a slip lane for safety, add a refuge island, and add through markings for bicyclists across El Camino. The city awaits an encroachment permit from Caltrans, and the project is out to bid now. Next slide. To the north, the Churchill Avenue Enhanced Bikeway project will connect the Embarcadero Multi-Use Path, or the Caltrain Path, as sometimes it's called that, to the Stanford Perimeter Trail that I mentioned earlier, by improving the crossing at Churchill Avenue. We have an existing multi-use path that goes left to right in this slide, east to west, that drops about a block away to the east of this pictured intersection at Palo Alto High School, where in normal times 1,000 students bike to school daily. This project closes a gap between the 2 trails and will give riders a low stress way to access, to get across El Camino Real to access either trail. We're coordinating with Stanford University so that on their end, cyclists will have appropriate connections to the perimeter trail. The project removes a pork chop island and a slip lane. It also adds a segment of the intersection. I forgot to mention that here. Sorry about that. It shortens crossing distances and it adds through markings for bike lanes. We await an easement from the school district to move forward. The city will have an upcoming community meeting for this project and hopes to go out to bid in early 2022 once design is final. Next slide, please. So what will Palo Alto's portion of El Camino Real look like in the future? In the short term, to protect our most vulnerable road users, we've asked our city school transportation safety committee, which is our Safe Routes to School partnership, to let us know what signage, striping, and signal timing changes they'd like to see that we can forward to Caltrans staff to fit into the repaving project. And as I mentioned before, we've already forwarded all of their suggestions to Caltrans, and Caltrans is willing to work with us and add items to their project as feasible. Also, I'm always open to hearing from folks about what needs fixing, and you can always email me, and I will gladly engage Caltrans in this conversation about how to make things better. And my email is on the next slide. In the future, coming up, I'm not done yet. The beginning this summer, the city will update our 2012 bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. And that plan update will be an opportunity for the community to let us know what they'd like to see in town and what they'd like to see on El Camino. If we receive clear direction and prioritization, staff could rescope a project on El Camino Real and apply for grant funding. We know that there's interest by VTA and Caltrans in upgrading El Camino Real, and a regional approach may be warranted here. In the meantime, we will continue to prioritize improving the crossings of El Camino Real for safety. Next slide. Thank you for your attention. It's now my great honor to introduce the fabulous and talented Jessica Manzi of Redwood City.
Thanks, Sylvia. And I would say that in Women's History Month, what an honor to be on a panel with so many amazing women. So thanks, Silicon Valley Bike Coalition for giving us this opportunity to come together. So next slide. So as you've heard from many of the other communities, here in Redwood City, we share this vision to transform El Camino Real into the Grand Boulevard that supports walking, transit, bicycling, and economic development. So for us, this is represented by the upper left image on this slide from our 2011 downtown precise plan. Since then, we've been working to improve and strengthen the streetscape consistent with the ideals of the Grand Boulevard Initiative. Our first comprehensive plan was the El Camino Real Corridor Plan, which developed a vision, goals, and strategies for the corridor with a focus on housing, economic vitality, placemaking, and of course, mobility. And then with the help of the GBI team and a sustainable planning grant, we completed the bike and ped safety improvement study to develop preliminary bike and ped design concepts on our segment of El Camino, where we have the highest number of bike and pedestrian collisions, which for us takes place between Maple and Charter Streets. Next slide. So during the various outreach efforts, we've heard very clear direction from our community on their priorities for how to improve El Camino. So first, they want protected bikeways. Being comfortable biking on El Camino really depends on having a physical barrier between the bike lanes and moving traffic. To get the space for a barrier or buffer, they much preferred keeping the existing number of travel lanes, but removing on-street parking. So it's consistent with what we see in a lot of other communities that have spoken so far. Where we run into challenges are those segments where we have 3 travel lanes and no parking. So there are some segments where simply removing the parking won't be sufficient to get us a protected bike lane. Second, there's a need for more safer crossings. So enhancements could include high visibility crosswalks, median refuges, stronger traffic control with hawk signals or pedestrian hybrid beacons, and shortened crossing distances. And obviously where these safer crossings are provided, it's a benefit for pedestrians as well as bicyclists that are crossing El Camino. And then third, there's a lot of interest in improving El Camino where it goes underneath Woodside Road, which can be dark, loud, and feel very unsafe. And here we're looking at things like improved lighting, artwork, along with dedicated space for people who are riding their bikes. Next slide. So looking forward to our next steps, we have a grant from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority to advance our design work. For this, we're going to focus on some key design challenges on the corridor. Again, not unique to Redwood City, but first and foremost, we will working on how to design a protected bikeway that's compatible with and supports our small businesses. This top image shows a common configuration in Redwood City where we've got a lot of small shops with no alternative to El Camino for deliveries or garbage pickup or just how they run their day-to-day operations of their business, not even getting into the question of where customers might be parking. So that's a real challenge. And obviously with the effects of the pandemic on small business, we're very sensitive to making sure that improvements meet their needs as well as the mobility needs of the whole community. So we're also going to be looking at how best to accommodate bus stops next to the bikeway and prioritizing locations for those enhanced crossings. Next slide. So given the high cost of implementing bike improvements on El Camino and the challenges of redesigning the street with existing land uses, we want to leverage redevelopment to install protected bikeways at every opportunity. So this image is from the South Main mixed use project, which was approved at the end of last year. And while it's not reflected in their artist rendering, they will implement recommendations from our approved plans and studies along their project frontage, including protected bike lanes. So that insect image comes out of their offsite or their site improvement plans. And so you can squint and see the protected bike lane there. But as we do have a lot of development activity along El Camino, which we see as a wonderful opportunity to getting improvements on the ground faster than any other way. Next slide. So this slide summarizes the recent history of our work on El Camino and our approach for going forward, excuse me, and provides a little bit more context in our collaborations with Caltrans. So for both the El Camino Real Corridor Plan and the Bikes and Ped Safety Improvement Study, Caltrans staff has participated in the planning process and provided feedback on those documents. But also what's perhaps a little bit unique to our community is that in 2018, Caltrans created a bike safety improvement monitoring pilot program. So that's a statewide effort to identify and address bicyclist involved high collision concentration locations. But what was unique to us is that we were selected as one of the communities where they would actually do an audit bike safety audit with FHWA staff. And so through this process, they've identified, Caltrans initially identified locations that were to be investigated, and improvements were identified so that safety countermeasures can be programmed into the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, commonly known as the SHOP program. And so in 2018, Caltrans completed this bike safety audit, working with us city staff and our police departments and fire departments. So a really large working group spent a lot of time walking up and down El Camino and in Redwood City to look at opportunities for improvement. And no shock, they found a lot. So since then, Caltrans has created a project fact sheet and added the bike safety project into their work program. And so Caltrans planning staff will be starting work on what they call a project initiation document this July. So we'll be working with Caltrans on how best to coordinate our respective projects. Could be similar to what you've heard in Mountain View and Palo Alto about incorporating improvements that the city identifies into the Caltrans project, or implementing them in parallel. So that's an ongoing discussion and an opportunity for us in moving our plans forward. Next slide. And with that, I'll hand it over to Howard in Burlingame.
Actually, Jessica, in honor of Women's History Month, Councilmember Emily Beach is going to kick us off.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Good morning. So wonderful to hear about the great work that's happening on the El Camino Real corridor. Both Howard and I are going to share a little bit with you today about what's happening in Burlingame, which is really a unique section of El Camino Real along the corridor. First, let me just say that I thank Silicon Valley Bike Coalition for doing this. It's so important because everything we do along the corridor in our individual cities has an impact on the cities next door and down the line. So for those of you who don't know me, I work a lot. My passion area in policy is sustainable transportation. I was honored to serve on the Grand Boulevard Task Force and even the steering committee to figure out how Grand Boulevard Task Force would focus now on really mobility as we move forward into sort of the next decade of Grand Boulevard Initiative. And so care a lot about these issues and delighted to share what's happening in Burlingame. So to kick off, before we really begin the slide presentation, it's important to understand the context of Burlingame. It really is a section of El Camino Real like no other. It starts with the history of our city, which back in the 1920s, some really important land use decisions were made that El Camino Real and Burlingame, this 3-mile stretch, would be primarily residential. And that tradition continues to this day. We primarily, it's called our R3 zoning district. We primarily have multi-unit residential along the corridor. We have occasionally a single family home thrown in, but it's primarily multi-unit residential for about 2.5 miles of the stretch. There's a 1/2-mile stretch close to the Millbrae Transit Hub, the multimodal hub, which we allow our highest height in the entire city with conditional use permits. There could be residential with our new general plan or commercial that goes as high as 100 feet. But for the most part, El Camino Real is the home to our most naturally affordable housing in Burlingame, largely older stock. So, as we talk about the Grand Boulevard Initiative, we hear a lot that there's a desire along the whole corridor that we have more housing, that we have walkable cities with green infrastructure. We're considering road diets to make room for other modes of transportation. Because of historic decisions in Burlingame, we have a lot of those elements, but believe me, we have our own share of problems as well. There's 2 things that people in Burlingame agree on when it comes to El Camino Real, and they're about the only 2 things people in Burlingame agree on. And one is that the state highway is currently in a state of disrepair that is absolutely untenable and quite frankly, unsustainable. We'll show you some slides as we go through this presentation that no meaningful rehabilitation of that roadway has ever been done in the history since it's been paved. So we're talking decades and decades. And the second thing we agree on in Burlingame is that the tall trees, for those of you who have been through our section, which are primarily eucalyptus and elm, are part of our civic identity. The trees are something that we value. Greenery along El Camino, and that's really what makes our section a little bit different and a little bit special. So without further ado, let's go on to the next slide. Here's some glimpses of the existing conditions. As you can see, it's a very narrow section of roadway. It's basically 45 feet. We have sidewalks right up against. There's no shoulder between the cars that travel about 35 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour if you're lucky, right up against the sidewalks. You can see the sidewalks are in terrible disrepair. The crossings, you take your life into your hand when you go east-west because they're dangerous as well. Let's go to the next slide. You can see that some of the sidewalks, many of the sidewalks do not have any trees between the sidewalk and no shoulder on the roadway. So it's extremely dangerous for pedestrians. And you can see the tall 100-year-old trees. Let's go to the next forward. You can see that some of the sections of El Camino Real have retaining walls where the trees are being held up. Next slide, please. In rainstorms, it's particularly exciting. You can see this is an example of the flooding in El Camino Real in Burlingame. If you advance it a little bit further, you'll see another picture. That's very typical. Even in the lightest rainstorm, you nearly hydroplane when you're driving in an automobile. You can see what it does for pedestrians. So it's really unsustainable what we have in El Camino Real. Next slide, please. So what do we do about it? Well, one of the major problems that has existed for the better part of 50 years is that Burlingame values our trees, but they wreak a lot of havoc on the infrastructure. And this is in large part a staff group that knows way more than we electeds do, although I feel like I've had a master's degree in engineering over the last 5 years, to understand, to rehabilitate the roadway in a meaningful way, to fix the drainage, to really dig down and regrade the highway, which has never been done. And in order to get federal funding to fix the sidewalks that have to be ADA compliant, there has to be massive rehabilitation. And through a very thorough public process hand in hand in partnership with Caltrans, which is really groundbreaking work to work so closely with Caltrans, our community has come to the understanding, including members, stakeholders like the president of our historical society, our traffic safety parking commissioners, our beautification commissioners, that many of the trees may have to be replanted in order to make the road more sustainable, because the destabilization of many of these trees in order to really make the roadway and the sidewalk safer for all modes is something that really has to happen. And that's a big deal in Burlingame. So as we share with you what's happening, you have to kind of understand what that means to our community. We could go to the next slide, please. So again, a little bit about the process and where we are. For over 4 years, there was a citizen task force where 2 members of the council had Presidents Michael Brownrigg and I served on that task force with many community stakeholders, including folks that actually live on El Camino as well. And the task force, hand in hand with Caltrans, has figured out that we can move forward if we have some shared values, that we want safer and wider pedestrian pathways, we want safety improvements, we want to consider all sorts of infrastructure, crossing, flood protection, and we also want to preserve the look and feel, which may look different. It may require replanting of the tree canopy. And those trees are part of the California Historic Register. So they are something that has to be dealt with even from a historical perspective. So it's very important how we're moving forward. Where we are in the process right now is 4 years of citizen task force. Last year, Caltrans initiated the project and had a lot of public outreach. This spring or summer, they are releasing the draft environmental document. And that's where we need people to weigh in and comment on different project alternatives. But already they've started to identify different possible alternatives, nothing detailed yet, but how it might look. And we're very fortunate that Caltrans actually has prioritized this project so highly that they have at least $100 million that they have put forth, according to their website, to make this project happen, because they see this as a critical priority. Next slide, please. Some of the, we don't have time to go into these in detail, but these are some of the conceptual sections, cross sections that they're considering. Again, a lot of details need to be worked out, but they're considering build alternatives where they keep the 4 lanes of traffic basically as 4 lanes of traffic, and keeping the overhead, the utilities above ground. They're considering another alternative. Well, what could happen if those utilities are undergrounded? Of course, the city of Burlingame would have to play a significant, and we're prepared to put a significant portion of resources to try to make that happen as well. The other build alternative they're considering is a road diet. So they're in the process of studying what would that mean to What could you do within that section of the roadway? What would that mean to the local roads if a road diet happens? And then the fourth cross section is what would happen if a road diet is considered while also undergrounding utilities. And you can't talk to two members of the community or two members of the city council that necessarily share the same opinions about where this should go. But, different ideas are out there. I've heard from the community. Some people want to see the 4 lanes of traffic. Some people want to have wider spaces for shared use sidewalks for bicycles and pedestrians. Some people want to have more room for a wider planter strip so more trees can be planted to protect pedestrians. Other people want to see a turn lane for automobiles. Some people want express bus. Other people want bike lanes. All that is remained to be seen as Caltrans puts forth their proposed design alternatives. And then after they figure out what to do with the space, then what the details will look like. So we hope people will engage. And I guess the next slide, what I'll say is where I turn it over to Howard is the city of Burlingame was not going to wait for Caltrans to figure out how to make biking safer in our community. So a lot like Palo Alto, we've had to consider parallel paths in our community. And we've done some bike ped master planning work. We're looking at our crossings on El Camino, and we're going to have Howard take you through. He's one of the thought leaders who's the chair of our Traffic Safety Parking Commission in Burlingame to talk you through what we're doing around El Camino Real as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. So as Emily said, we don't entirely control what happens on El Camino. We have to share that cooperation with Caltrans, although we are very attentive, particularly in the intersections where people are moving east-west across town. People need to move across town for our high schools and our shopping, and we look very carefully at intersections in our bike ped master plan to make sure that those crossings are safe. I think what you would find in our master plan, and I think it would be easier if we maybe just move right up to the next. Well, before we go to the next slide, I would say we invested a lot in the bike ped master plan. We spent several months doing outreach. We had a very sophisticated website that asked all kinds of citizens in Burlingame to give all kinds of particular input for any given intersection where they thought that there were issues. We did very specific outreach to schools. A lot of our bike population can be school children, high school and middle school kids who don't necessarily show up for evening planning meetings and give input on particular intersections. So we really went out of our way to get outreach from those populations and showed up to schools and asked questions before we put this master plan together. I think if you could go to the next slide, what it'll show is that we have given a lot of thought to moving across Burlingame from we call it north-south, but obviously you can see from the map, it's really more of a northwest, southeast direction. But we have another arterial that runs parallel to El Camino Real, California Drive. That arterial ends at the Millbrae Transit Hub, which is the last stop for BART. Running along it, there are 2 Caltrain stops, is very close also to our high school. And I would say for the last 8 or 9 years since I joined the Traffic Commission, the city has given a lot of thought to making that corridor more bikeable so that people who come into Burlingame can get across Burlingame and can use that to get to key spots in Burlingame. And I think it really started, we've started essentially at the top. And if you could go to the next slide, what it shows is a before and after picture. I believe a couple of years ago, we've already rehabilitated parts of California. You can see the before and after picture, where in the before picture, what you would see, it's a little hard to tell, but we had street parking next to parking lots on California Drive, where people were trying to bike to work to get to the Millbrae Transit Hub. We've now put in bike lanes there. You can see the green dashes. That's right in front of our police station. I believe we have some other good before and after pictures. If you advance the slides to the next slide. Yeah, you can see there's a person moving in the street, the sidewalk, the paths weren't good. We've added added the bike lane there. You can see there was the car parked in the before picture next to the parking lot. If you advance one more for me. Yeah, you can see, again, we've added a bike lane. It's become more bikeable. There was a prior slide. Yeah, that's it. You can see if you look really, it's hard to see, unfortunately, but you can see there's actually a dumpster in the before slide pre-2018. We had a regular deposit of a dumpster in the lane where people are trying to bike. So we've done a lot of rehabilitation in California, all the way from the Millbrae Transit Hub down to Broadway. And we've received another grant to redesign California Drive south of Broadway, going down to Oak Grove towards our high school. Also during this time, we received a grant to do a road diet on Carolyn, which is the next parallel road over. And that runs between our Broadway train station all the way to our high school. So we're trying to be as thoughtful as possible about bicyclists, where they're going in Burlingame and how they can get there safely. That is going to continue to be challenging for us as work gets done on El Camino, but also as we can consider a Broadway grade separation across our rail tracks. And I can tell you, working with our city staff on those issues, that we give a lot of thought to as that area is redesigned, how it is going to be a massive improvement for bicyclists and pedestrians, and not just an improvement for traffic and cars.
Howard, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to move you along because we're running out of
Oh,
time.
that's it. That's the end of my presentation. So no need.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Laughlin, and on behalf of the town of Colma, we really appreciate this opportunity to share with you our plan for the El Camino Real through Colma. Next slide, please. So my presentation will start with a little bit about Colma, our planned improvements, how we came to prepare the plan, and then our next steps. So I think it's important to let everyone know a little bit about Colma if you're not familiar with us. We're about 2 square miles. 75% of the land in Colma is in cemetery use or planned for cemetery use. And you can see on the map on the right, the green areas are the cemeteries. And a number of the cemeteries actually have burials that come right up to the El Camino Real. Our population is only about 1,700 people. We do have 2 shopping centers, an auto row, and a card room. And we do have a very unique semi-rural setting as you go through Colma on the El Camino Real. Next slide, please. Colma has been very aggressive in pursuing improvements to our major roadways. And so we are currently under construction. The bottom right picture shows the construction that's coming to completion on Mission Road to the south portion of our town to improve the roadway, add pedestrian improvements, green infrastructure, and improve bikeways and lighting. Several years ago, we did a Ceremony Collins master plan, which there's an artist rendering on the left, this is an artist rendering showing Ceremony Boulevard with a road diet that's going from 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, to 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane in order to add improvements. And then finally, Hillside Boulevard, and this is a project we've won several awards for. It's a road diet that we did that added green infrastructure and also bike lanes as well. And then we also were able to get a grant from Kaiser Permanente to put in a bike repair station along in front of our community center, right adjacent to Hillside Boulevard. Next slide, please. So how we came to prepare the plan. This is El Camino Real, as you'll see from some pictures I'm going to show you, needs improvement. not a lot has, like Burlingame, not a lot has been done on El Camino Real for many years. It's been a wish list for the Planning Department and Public Works Departments. We applied for a Caltrans Sustainable Communities grant and we received the grant. We then hired Fair & Peers to prepare the plan. We started in October of 2018 and we just finished the plan. Next slide, please. So the plan covers basically the area from the Colma BART station to the north, almost heading south into South San Francisco, not too far away from the South San Francisco BART station. There's two different, very distinct roadway sections. We'll call them segment A and segment B. Segment A is is 3 lanes in each direction. Segment B is existing at 2 lanes in each direction. Next slide, please. So this this is the existing El Camino Real, and you can see, as I mentioned, it's very rural in nature. We have a wide center median with a lot of drainage improvements that are in there. There's a drainage culvert. So we looked at options to basically keep the center median. It's also used for cut-throughs into the cemeteries, for funeral processions and other businesses. So it would require quite a bit of work to change that. And we felt that we would be more competitive for grant funding if we kept the center median. Next slide, please. The picture on the top is what we affectionately call our Y intersection, which is Mission Road, which is actually the old portion of El Camino Real, the original portion before it was realigned. And you can see that this is probably one of the most inhospitable intersections you can imagine for bicyclists and pedestrians. And then below, you can see how El Camino Real transitions into 2 lanes, heading south into South San Francisco. And there's very little shoulder room available to put in improvements. Next slide, please. So we formed a technical advisory committee that was comprised of our neighboring cities, South San Francisco, Daly City. Caltrans was at the table, as well as stakeholders that included property owners and businesses along the El Camino Real corridor. We set up a website. We had surveys, various community meetings, and we had pop-up events at the Colma BART station to try and get feedback on the plan. Next slide, please. So what we ended up with is actually the preferred option was to propose a road diet on El Camino Real. And so we went from basically for segment A, 3 lanes in each direction, as you can see up in the upper corner, to 2 lanes, and then taking out the 3rd lane in favor of a protected bicycle lane and sidewalks and some landscaping. Next slide, please. For the segment that goes into South San Francisco, we have just tried to we have to keep 2 lanes in each direction, but then also just need to use some of that right of way that we have left there. And it is going to be a little tricky to get the bike lane and sidewalk in that area, but it is feasible. Next slide, please. This is what the plan looks like in plan view. You can see that we've included all of the various types of intersection improvements that you would expect: protected crosswalks, pedestrian refuge, separating the bicycle signal phases, curb extensions. We'll be adding green infrastructure and landscaping as well. Next slide, please. And this is a very quick simulation of the improvements. heading north. Okay, next slide, please. This is the intersection of Mission Road that I showed you earlier, the Y, and how we've basically reconfigured it into a more traditional T intersection to be able to add the bicycle and pedestrian improvements. It's especially critical because there's a bus stop on the other side, and we have an affordable veterans housing project on Mission Road, and those folks have no way to get to the bus stop for the El Camino Real. Next slide, please. So what are our next steps? Well, because we're proposing a road diet and that was the preferred alternative, there's a lot of studies that need to be done to present to Caltrans to show that this is feasible. We do believe it is feasible based on the traffic volumes on El Camino Real. And one of the things we may also consider is, due to the cost, is a quick build. And I've included a money tree over here. So if you have the $24 million that we anticipate it would take to implement this project, we would welcome your donations. But we are expecting and hoping to get grant funds for a lot of these improvements because they do, of course, address the safety issues and concerns that we have. And so next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation. My contact information is there, and also you can see the full plan on our website as well. And since I was the last person, I'll turn it back over to John for question and answer.
Go. Thank you, Michael. Emma Schlaze, our Deputy Director, has been compiling your questions during the presentation. And so Emma's going to lead the Q&A section now. It's 11:17, so let's see how far we can get in 11 minutes. We have one more slide of announcements at the end.
Thank you, everyone. Great presentations. I enjoyed hearing about all the updates going on in all the cities. So I've been amassing the questions and sorting them. So there was a few that were related, so I'll start there. Everyone is concerned or interested in how the cities are working together at the borders. So how maybe some of the cities want to speak, or also GBI or Caltrans want to talk about how the cities can connect their plan to what's going on in the neighboring cities. So whether that's another El Camino plan that has a similar or different design, or a city like Palo Alto that has the bike trail that's parallel, or other cities that have other parallel routes. How can we work together on those transitions?
I can speak to that issue. So as part of the Peninsula Bikeway project between Mountain View, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Redwood City, so we have an interim bikeway at the moment, which goes through some of these local streets and parallel routes. And so some of the improvements that are proposed under that project are things that would kind of connect to the next phase. So, approaching our final design, but kind of what's the next, how do we link to the next phase of that? So at the moment, there's some work, I think, in Palo Alto on Park Avenue, if I got that. Sylvia can correct me if that's wrong, but, so some of the changes, might connect to there. In Mountain View, we're focused on El Camino as kind of one of our long-term projects, and trying to link back to the interim route as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just to tag on to that, the framework in that managers mobility partnership was really to say, yeah, we've signed an existing north-south route that is used now, and ultimately, we might in Palo Alto decide to invest along El Camino, but in the interim, we have all these great routes, and we want people to know that they exist, and we've signed it so that people can find them. I think making those connections between El Camino and the existing Palo Alto routes is something that we can work on, and I've already been talking to Caltrans about adding signage for that. so that if people do find themselves on El Camino, they will see wayfinding signage to get them off of El Camino onto our routes, which many and you see in our chat today, Penny Elson is one of our advocates who's been saying, like, everybody should know about these parallel routes because they're amazing and feel a lot better than riding on El Camino right now. So we're definitely open to that, but you know, at some point, do we need to have a conversation in Palo Alto about what should go on El Camino? We haven't had that conversation.
Thank you both. Does anyone else want to chime in there? Okay, I will move on to the next question. A couple of questions actually came up about street parking. So Ann Schneider from Millbrae, council member, asked if you remove on-street parking, how do the adjacent merchants feel in terms of getting customers to shop? And then another councilwoman, Jen Willison, asked if you could share methodology for doing the parking study, like days, times, forms, etc. Does anyone want to tackle that?
That sounds like it's another one for me. So in terms of the days and times, we started, I think it was like 6 a.m. was our morning one, and we went through till 9 p.m., something like that. We had a few days that were weekdays, and then a few days that were weekends. And actually the times on the weekends were slightly different because it's a later, the peaking is different in terms of parking and our expectations. And I'm happy to share with you like we provided information to our parking surveys as well. So I can share that with you if you want to send me an email.
So I could add a little bit on that. As part of our planning efforts, we asked specific questions in our surveys of the community about how they use parking in El Camino. And I think one reason why community members were really willing to give up that parking is people don't like parking on El Camino. Like, it's really uncomfortable when you have that volume of traffic and the speed of the traffic going by to stop in the lane, parallel park. People just avoid it if they can. And so, you know, we are really focusing on accommodating, you know, all modes so that we could reduce the number of people that are driving there, but then looking at other creative solutions where, you know, can people share their off-street parking so that on-street parking's less necessary? Can we use some side streets to add parking or loading zones to get a little bit more creative? But so we really feel like our biggest challenge isn't so much the customer parking as making sure that those businesses can function without that space in front of their spot. Like, where does the garbage get picked up? Those real practical issues, I think, for us are going to be a bigger challenge than accommodating parking for customers or employees.
Thank you both. Another question, well, I'll move on. Actually, Sergio, if you would like to unmute yourself, I have a couple of questions for Caltrans. So first, the question I asked earlier of how cities could work together on the transitions and whether that's something that Caltrans can play a role in, and also just in terms of overall design of the corridor. I know that when we did the Redwood City bike safety audit, there was a lot of discussion internally at Caltrans about how to address that corridor overall. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely acknowledge that it remains a challenge given how many jurisdictions are involved. I think this forum right here is a really good way to illustrate that. I think looking at potential planning efforts that maybe cross jurisdictional lines or involve multiple jurisdictions might be a good approach. I really like the Peninsula Bikeway approach because it does involve multiple cities and looks at the overall network and the phasing. So that could potentially be a very good model for that. Of course, Caltrans is kind of the common thread through this entire corridor, or most of the corridor, not including San Jose. So Caltrans definitely plays a role in that, but at the same time, Caltrans is very focused on the state highway. And we don't necessarily know the intimate details of the local network that really needs to also inform what kind of connected network what the connected network would look like. So I think the planning grants that we have available at Caltrans is a competitive grant process to help plan these is probably a good resource for some of the cities, or maybe even at the county level, or if multiple cities want to participate in one, that's a good approach. And then we have our standards that we go by in terms of trying to look for some kind of consistency or continuity in what facilities look like. But at the state level, there's intentional flexibility in how cities want to design their bikeways, because there are a lot of local context that needs to be taken into consideration. So kind of a very high level response to that, I realize, but it does remain a challenge.
Okay, and one more question for you. You may have seen in the chat a lot of people interested in an open streets event on El Camino Real. Is that something that Caltrans would be interested in pursuing?
We don't have a program internally within the district to actually host open street events, but we have worked with jurisdictions to do similar events on state highways. I think a recent example that I'm aware of that I helped with was on San Pablo Avenue in the East Bay across Berkeley and Emeryville and Oakland, I think. So that was a good model where it is a state highway. It included a couple cities or jurisdictions, and it closed the highway for a day as an open street event. So there is precedence for that, and I think Caltrans would definitely be willing and eager to work with any jurisdictions who would want to sponsor an event like that. It's just about the logistics and getting the permit and building enough time in the planning and involving Caltrans early on to make sure that that's possible and that a permit can be secured for that. But it takes resources, and I don't know what might be available to help fund something like that, but I think it's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to try and get to a couple more questions. I'm going to lump these two together, even though they're not similar at all. One person asked about other types of small vehicle transportation, so scooters, skateboards, there's a whole host of things out there, and how those can be accommodated in different types of bicycle facilities that are being proposed. And then related question is how you deal with maintenance of these facilities. And I am lumping that together because, you know, there's sometimes mini street sweepers and new technology around that. So does anyone want to take on that question? No one's gotten to the maintenance portion yet.
We've been thinking through the maintenance piece. So at the moment we have just a few, like maybe a mile or so of class 4 bike facilities, and we're using a leaf blower to sweep them. But in the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, we have plans to purchase a class 4 bikeway street sweeper. And I think that I saw a comment about making the class 4 facilities wide enough for a regular street sweeper. I think that that's probably not a good idea in most cases, because then that invites motorists to you know, it's confusing for motorists. They might consider it to be like a slip lane or get confused and end up driving through there. So having it a little narrower is beneficial from that perspective, unless it's a two-way bike facility. The downside of having the smaller street sweeper is that you have to make more runs to drop off the debris that you pick up. And so there is an additional operating cost that's associated with a smaller street sweeper, in addition to the cost of the sweeper itself.
What about the micromobility question? Anyone have thoughts on that or been thinking about that?
I mean, my only real thought on that is that, you know, the wider your facility is, you know, you have more ability for people to sort out by speed. But again, you run into just the fundamental constraints of the roadway width, as well as the problems if it turns out to be if it's wide enough to be a full travel lane width, then you run that risk of people, drivers using it as well. I think the speed differential is just going to be an ongoing challenge, but it's not, I don't think it's so different than what we run into in class 1 paths as well, where you have a pretty big differential between, you know, people walking with strollers or kids on, you know, push bikes, and you have people on e-bikes passing by them. So I think it's in some ways just a learning curve.
Okay, well, it's 11:30, so I apologize if I didn't get to your questions, but we will send out the recording and the slides and some of these questions as well. And John, I know you have one more thing that you want to share. Oh, I believe he may have frozen. Oh, no, he's there. John?
Thank you. And I appreciate, we'll hopefully get more people to support more of the questions. So I just want to make a couple announcements of upcoming events. Hopefully you're seeing this. If not, we will send it out with the survey. So we have our next Biketivist Forum coming up on April 21st, 5 to 7 p.m. on Vision Zero. Some of the cities have a Vision Zero. Some of the cities are thinking about Vision Zero. So we're encouraging everybody to participate. Send their interested parties to our Vision Zero. That'll be from 5 to 6, the overview of Vision Zero. Then the local teams will meet from 6 to 7. We're doing another infrastructure ride. The next one will be April 22nd, same time from 10:30 to noon. It will be slow streets across and slow street projects across both San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. And finally, a plug for Bike to Wherever Days, May 21st. There's all kinds of other events happening. Please sign up to provide an Energizer station for your city, or post your events with us so that people can find them. And we will be sending out a survey for participants after this event. Hopefully you found this worthwhile and a good use of your time, and we'll see you again in the future. Thank you, and have a good day and a great weekend. Bike on, John out.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Bye.